On the coldest Christmas Eve Ashford Manor had seen in 20 years, Duke Adrian Ashford asked a woman with no fortune, no protection, and no reason to trust him to pretend she was his wife. He did not ask in a chapel. He did not offer roses, vows, or tenderness. He found Emily Hartwell in the servants' corridor with one worn valise in her hand, her cloak damp from melted snow, and her face held with the quiet dignity of a woman trying not to cry after being thrown out of a house full of people who had never believed she belonged there. Behind her, Ashford Manor glowed with candles and Christmas garlands. Music drifted from the ballroom. Guests laughed beneath chandeliers. Servants hurried past with silver trays and mulled wine. No one in those golden rooms knew that Emily, who had been hired only as a winter companion to Adrian's elderly aunt, had been dismissed because she dared to defend a maid Lady Beatrice Vale had falsely accused of stealing a pearl bracelet. Adrian should have let her go. A sensible man would have done exactly that. Emily Hartwell was not his burden. She had no claim on his name, his house, or his conscience. In society's eyes, she was simply another poor gentlewoman who could be sent away with a few coins and a polite lie. But that night, Adrian was no longer dealing with sensible choices. Only an hour earlier, his uncle, Lord Nathaniel Vale, had informed him that the Ashford family council would assemble after Twelfth Night to review his authority over the estate. According to Nathaniel, an old clause in the late Duke's will required Ashford Manor to have a recognised mistress before Adrian could continue controlling several family trusts without oversight. Without a duchess, without a stable household, without what Nathaniel called proper feminine guidance, Adrian could be declared unfit to manage Ashford alone. And Nathaniel had already chosen the woman who would save him. Lady Beatrice Vale had arrived that afternoon in ivory silk, pearls, and triumph. She was beautiful enough to be admired, rich enough to be useful, and cruel enough to think both. Qualities made her worthy of becoming Duchess of Ashford. At dinner, she had spoken of the manor as though she were already measuring curtains. She praised tradition, pitied Adrian's loneliness, and smiled at him with the confidence of a woman who believed a man trapped by family pressure would eventually call surrender duty. Then Adrian saw Emily in the corridor. She was preparing to leave through the service door into a snowstorm with no carriage waiting and nowhere near enough money to travel safely. Her aunt's cottage near Briar Glen was 7 miles away. Adrian knew about the cottage because his steward had once mentioned that Miss Hartwell sent nearly every coin she earned to keep an elderly relative from losing her home. "You are leaving tonight?" he asked. Emily, startled, then lowered her eyes, though not in submission. Adrian noticed that at once. Poverty had pressed her down, but it had not taught her to bend easily. "I was told it would be best, Your Grace. In this weather, Lady Beatrice believed my continued presence might disturb the holiday spirit." The answer was too polite to be harmless. Adrian looked past her toward the service entrance where snow blew beneath the door in pale dust. "Where will you go?" "My aunt's cottage. It is only 7 miles. Only 7 miles through a storm? It is not the first difficult road I have taken." He should have admired the answer and let her pass. Instead, Nathaniel's voice returned to him. No duchess. No recognized mistress. No authority. Beatrice was waiting in the ballroom like a silk-wrapped chain, and every person under his roof expected him to accept her because refusing had become legally dangerous. A reckless thought formed. "Miss Hartwell," Adrian said, "what would it cost to save your aunt's cottage?" Emily went very still. "I beg your pardon." "The mortgage. The arrears. Whatever debt has forced you to accept employment in houses where women like Lady Beatrice can dismiss you for having a conscience." Color touched her cheeks. "That is not your concern." "No," he said. "But it may be part of my offer." Her eyes sharpened then, wary and wounded together. "What offer?" Adrian glanced toward the distant music, then back at her. He had built his life on control of his temper, his estate, his name, his heart. Yet now he was about to gamble all of it on a woman he barely knew. "I need a wife for 12 days, he said. Emily stared at him. A wife. A false one. The silence between them was filled with the glow of snow. "My uncle intends to force my hand through an old clause in my father's will. If I present a wife before the family council arrives, his plan collapses. You would not marry me in truth. You would only appear as my wife until 12th night. You would stay here, be introduced as Duchess of Ashford, attend the Christmas gatherings, and leave when the family disperses. You cannot possibly be serious. I am entirely serious. That may be worse. I will pay enough to clear your aunt's debt and provide for her comfort. That was the arrow that found her. Adrian saw it in the way her hand tightened around the valise, in the way her pride struggled against the one thing it could not ignore. Emily could refuse comfort for herself. She could not refuse rescue for the woman who had taken her in after her father died. Still, she did not answer quickly, and he respected her more for that. A poor woman pretending to be a duke's wife would not be forgiven if exposed. Society would call her grasping, immoral, ambitious, ridiculous. It would punish her for needing money and condemn her for accepting it. What exactly would I have to do? She asked. Stand beside me. Wear my ring. Answer to my name. Allow my family to believe we married quietly before Christmas to avoid their interference. That is an enormous lie. Yes. And when the 12 days end? Adrian's expression hardened because this was the part that had to remain absolute. A lie survived only with boundaries. A bargain survived only if neither person mistook it for a dream. When Christmas ends, you will leave Ashford Manor before dawn. No farewell. No letters. No explanation to anyone. Whatever happens during those 12 days must end. Emily looked at him for a long moment. You are asking me to vanish when I become inconvenient. I am asking you to understand the boundary before we begin. And if your family discovers the truth, they will not. That is not an answer. No, Adrian admitted. It is a promise I intend to keep. Emily lowered her gaze. From her cloak pocket, she withdrew a folded notice worn soft at the edges. Adrian saw only fragments: final payment, seizure, New Year. Her aunt's home. The last shelter left to her. At last, Emily folded the letter again. 12 days, she said. 12 days. You will save my aunt's cottage. Yes. And afterward, I leave before dawn without goodbye. Yes. Something flickered across her face too quick to. Then I accept. Less than an hour later, Emily Hartwell entered the Blue Chamber as a dismissed companion, and emerged dressed as the Duchess of Ashford. Mrs. Wren, the old housekeeper, had found a pale blue silk gown from a family wardrobe and altered it with pins and ribbon. The neckline rested elegantly off Emily's shoulders, softened by lace. Her brown hair had been swept into a simple arrangement at the back of her neck with a few curls escaping around her face. She did not look like Beatrice, polished and sharp as cut glass. She looked frightened, graceful, and painfully sincere, which made the deception feel far more dangerous. Adrian gave her the Ashford ring outside the ballroom. It was an old sapphire surrounded by diamonds, worn by 7 generations of duchesses. Emily hesitated when she saw it. Has this belonged to your family long? Long enough. Then perhaps you should use something less sacred for a lie. The words struck him strangely. He had thought of the ring as proof, a necessary prop. No one could easily dispute. Emily saw it as an inheritance carried by women before her. For the first time that night, Adrian felt the dishonor of what he was asking. It must be convincing, he said. Emily nodded and let him slide the ring onto her finger. It fit. Neither of them spoke of that. When Adrian opened the ballroom doors and entered with Emily on his arm, the music faltered then died. Every face turned. Beatrice stood near the fireplace, her champagne glass half raised, her ivory gown glowing beneath the chandeliers. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed at once. Adrian did not give the room time to recover. Forgive the interruption, he said, his voice carrying with the authority of a man born to command silence. There has been some confusion regarding the future of Ashford Manor. Allow me to correct it. This is my wife, Emily Hartwell Ashford, Duchess of Ashford. The shock was almost beautiful. Aunt Agatha dropped her fan. Someone whispered, impossible. Beatrice's face drained of color so quickly that even her pearls seemed too bright against her skin. Nathaniel did not gasp or protest, but hatred sharpened his expression like a blade being drawn. Emily stood beside Adrian with her hand resting lightly on his arm. He felt the tremor in her fingers, though her face remained composed. That composure saved them more than any grand performance could have. A fraud might have overacted, Emily did not. She looked overwhelmed, dignified, and private, as though a hidden truth had been forced into the light. Beatrice recovered first. "How extraordinary," she said, her smile too slow to be natural. "A secret marriage? How romantic. And how very sudden." "Not sudden to those involved," Adrian replied. Her gaze moved over Emily's dress, then paused on the sapphire. "How fortunate your grace found a bride so close at hand." Emily felt the insult. So did Adrian. But before he could answer, Emily spoke softly. "Fortune is often kinder than people expect, Lady Beatrice." A few guests looked away to hide their surprise. Adrian turned slightly toward Emily, and for the first time that night, something almost like amusement touched his eyes. Nathaniel stepped forward. "My dear nephew, you must understand that such an announcement raises questions. A marriage of this importance conducted without family witness, without public notice, without consultation, is still a marriage," Adrian said. "If true." The room tightened again. Emily understood then that Nathaniel would not wait 12 days to strike. He would test every seam of the lie, politely and publicly, until something tore. Adrian placed his hand over hers for one brief moment. To the room it looked affectionate. To Emily, it felt like both warning and reassurance. "It is Christmas Eve," Adrian said. "If you wish to interrogate my wife, uncle, you may wait until after dinner." The word wife moved through Emily like warmth and fear together. Dinner became a battlefield disguised with silverware. Beatrice asked questions with the sweetness of poisoned honey. Where had Adrian proposed? Who had witnessed the vows? Which church had received them? Had Emily always admired Ashford? Each question seemed harmless until placed beside the next, forming a net. Emily answered carefully, sometimes with enough truth to make the lie stronger. Adrian had not proposed in a church, so she said the moment had been private. There had been no grand declaration, so she said his grace was not a man who used 20 words when one would do. When Beatrice asked whether she had married him for love or security, the table went still. Emily set down her glass. "I married him," she said, "because he asked me at a moment when everyone else was deciding his life for him." The answer was too close to the truth. Adrian looked at her across the candlelight, and something unreadable passed between them. Beatrice saw it and hated her for it. Over the next few days, Emily learned that pretending to be a duchess required less acting than endurance. She stumbled over seating arrangements, forgot the title of a distant cousin, and once used the wrong spoon at breakfast, which made Beatrice smile as though she had uncovered a crime. Yet every mistake in aristocratic ritual was followed by some instinctive act no one had taught her. Emily remembered the names of footmen. She noticed the housekeeper's cough and sent broth to her room. She refused to let Beatrice cancel the village children's Christmas visit because the snow might dirty the carpets. She rewrote Adrian's annual address to the tenants, removing cold sentences about duty and replacing them with words of thanks so sincere that an old Adrian noticed all of it. That was the trouble. He had hired Emily to fill a role. She kept filling empty spaces he had stopped seeing. At dinner, she drew his shy cousin into conversation. In the chapel, she sang carols softly enough not to display herself but with such feeling that the servants lingered near the doors. In the west corridor, he found her kneeling beside a little village girl whose mitten had torn, tying it with blue ribbon from her own sleeve. She never looked around to see whether anyone watched, and that made watching her feel more intimate than it should have. On the 6th night of Christmas, Beatrice struck harder. The family gathered in the great hall after supper, the fire burning high, the guests warmed by wine and gossip. Beatrice sat near the pianoforte, holding the Ashford ring she had borrowed from Emily under the pretense of admiring it. Emily had allowed it because refusal would have drawn attention. Adrian saw the exchange from across the room and started toward them, but Beatrice spoke first. Her voice was bright enough to carry. "Your Grace, I have been asking your dear wife about your proposal, and she is far too modest to tell us the romantic details. Surely you must share them. Where did you ask her? What did you say? A duchess should not be so shy about her own love story." Emily's blood turned cold. This was the question they had not prepared for. They had invented dates, reasons for secrecy, and enough practical details to satisfy suspicion. They had not invented romance. The room turned toward her with eager curiosity. Nathaniel watched from beside the mantel, smiling faintly. Beatrice held the sapphire ring between two fingers as though she had already caught Emily without it. Emily opened her mouth, but no answer came. Then Adrian crossed the room. He took the ring from Beatrice's hand with such calm authority that she had no choice but to release it. He turned to Emily and before everyone, slid the sapphire back onto her finger. "I did not ask Emily to marry me because she was suitable," he said. The hall fell silent. "I did not ask because my family approved or because society expected it. Or because she strengthened some political arrangement." His voice lowered, but it carried more power for that. "I asked because she was the first woman in years who made this house feel less empty." No one spoke. Not Beatrice. Not Nathaniel. Not Emily. Because those words were not in the contract. Later that night, Emily stood alone in her chamber, the sapphire ring lying on the dressing table like a beautiful accusation. She told herself Adrian had only saved them from exposure. A clever answer. A necessary performance. Nothing more. Yet her heart had heard his voice in the great hall and betrayed her by wanting the words to be true. A knock sounded at the door. Adrian stood in the corridor, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. "You should wear it," he said. Emily looked down at the sapphire. "Even when no one is watching. Especially then." She picked up the ring but did not put it on. "When this began, you said I must leave after 12 days without goodbye." "Yes. And after everything that has happened." Adrian was silent for a long moment. Beyond the windows, snow drifted over Ashford Manor, covering the gardens and the dark road that would one day carry Emily away before dawn. At last, Adrian said, "After that, we remember the condition." Emily closed her fingers around the ring until the diamonds pressed into her palm. And for the first time since she had accepted his bargain, 12 days felt less like a rescue and more like a sentence. By the 7th day of Christmas, Emily Hartwell had become the most dangerous lie in Ashford Manor because everyone was beginning to wish she were true. That was what Beatrice understood before Adrian did. A false duchess should have looked nervous, greedy, or eager to display her borrowed power. Emily did none of that. She asked for nothing beyond what had been promised. She did not use Adrian's name to humiliate anyone who had insulted her. She did not pretend to know more than she did about aristocratic rituals. When she made mistakes, she corrected them quietly. When she saw suffering, she moved toward it before remembering that a duchess was supposed to summon someone else. By the 8th day, the servants no longer whispered about her as the poor companion who had stolen a title. They began whispering that Ashford Manor had not felt so warm in years. Adrian heard those whispers too. He tried not to listen. He tried to remember the condition, 12 days. No farewell. No letters. No returning. But each day made the boundary feel less like wisdom and more like cowardice. Emily sat beside Aunt Agatha for hours when the old woman's joints ached from the cold. She convinced the cook to send extra bread to the village after a tenant's roof collapsed beneath snow. She placed candles in the unused chapel windows because she said light should not be saved only for rooms where noble guests gathered. Adrian watched her move through his house as if she had been born to notice what he had trained himself to ignore. And the fear that rose in him was not fear of exposure. It was fear that he had hired the one woman he would not know how to lose. On the 10th night, a child from the village went missing during a snowstorm after the Christmas charity supper. The manor erupted in panic, and while Beatrice complained that the search would ruin the evening, Emily was already wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. Adrian found her at the front door, pale but determined. "You are not going out into that storm," he said. "A little girl is out there. I will send men." "She is frightened. If she hears only men shouting in the dark, she may hide." There was no argument strong enough to defeat that. Adrian went with her. They found the child near the old chapel ruins, curled beneath a broken stone arch, too cold to cry. Emily knelt in the snow and gathered the girl against her before Adrian could remove his coat. The child clung to Emily, whispering that she had followed the candles in the chapel windows until the storm confused her. Emily looked up at Adrian then, snow caught in her hair, the child held safe against her breast. And something in his carefully guarded heart simply surrendered. Back at the manor, while the servants rushed to warm the child, Adrian caught Emily's hand in the corridor. "You could have frozen," he said. "So could she." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." He looked at her, at the damp curls against her cheek, at the borrowed sapphire on her finger. At the woman he had told himself would leave before dawn and become no more than a secret. He nearly said her name with everything he had been trying not to feel. But Emily withdrew first, as though she had heard the danger in the silence. "Do not look at me like that, Your Grace," she whispered. "Not if I am still expected to disappear." The words stayed between them, and Beatrice, standing unseen at the far end of the corridor, heard enough. 2 days later, on the final night of Christmas, Ashford Manor gathered for the grand supper. Before the family council, Nathaniel had been quieter since Emily's arrival, but his silence had not been surrender. He had spent the past days searching parish records, questioning servants, and sending riders through snow to uncover proof that Adrian's marriage had never happened. Beatrice found what he needed in Adrian's study, the written agreement signed by Adrian and Emily, promising payment for 12 days of pretending and requiring Emily's departure before dawn after 12th night. She waited until every important guest was seated. Then she placed the contract in the center of the dinner table. The room froze. "How moving," Beatrice said, her voice bright with triumph. "The Duchess of Ashford has a price." Emily looked at the paper and felt the world narrow to ink, candlelight, and the sudden absence of breath in her chest. Adrian rose slowly, but Nathaniel was already on his feet. "A false wife," Nathaniel declared. "A hired woman. A fraud brought into this house to deceive the family and defeat the will of the late Duke." Guests whispered. A few looked at Emily with pity. More looked at her as society always looked at a poor woman caught too near power, as though her guilt had been waiting from the beginning. Adrian's voice cut through the room. "Enough." But Emily knew this could not be solved by command. The truth had arrived ugly and undeniable because it had always been there. She had signed the contract. She had taken the money. She had worn the ring. What hurt was not exposure. It was realizing that Beatrice could make everything Emily had given look purchased. Emily stood. She removed the sapphire ring from her finger and placed it beside the contract. "You are right about one thing," she said softly. Adrian turned toward her. "Emily." She did not look at him yet. If she did, she might not survive what she had to say. "I was paid to come here. I was paid to wear his name, stand beside him, and leave when Christmas ended." Her voice trembled, but she did not let it break. "But no one paid me to learn the names of your servants. No one paid me to keep the village children warm. No one paid me to sit with Aunt Agatha when she was in pain or to care whether this house felt alive. And no one paid me to love Ashford." The room went utterly still. Only then did she look at Adrian. "You asked me to leave without goodbye, Your Grace. I will honor the one condition we both signed." She turned and walked out before anyone could stop her. Adrian followed, but by the time he reached the front steps, Emily had already entered the carriage Mrs. Wren had quietly ordered for her. Snow fell heavily. For one terrible second, their eyes met through the glass. Then the carriage moved down the drive, carrying Emily away exactly as Adrian had demanded. Ashford Manor did not recover after she left. The supper ended in silence. The servants moved like shadows. Aunt Agatha refused to speak to Adrian for an entire morning. The village child Emily had saved cried when told the Duchess had gone. Beatrice tried to claim victory, but triumph looked vulgar in a house that had just lost its heart. Nathaniel called the family council at noon, confident that the false marriage had destroyed Adrian's authority. But Mrs. Wren entered before the proceedings began, followed by the butler, the cook, the tenant steward, and half a dozen village elders. In her hands was the late Duke's original household ledger, a book Nathaniel had ignored because he believed servants never understood legal matters. Inside was a note in the late Duke's own hand clarifying the disputed clause. The recognized mistress of Ashford need not be a wife by blood or law before the council. She must be the woman acknowledged by the household and dependents as the guardian of its welfare. Mrs. Wren placed another paper on the table. It bore signatures from servants, tenants, villagers, and even Aunt Agatha. "All of Ashford recognizes Miss Emily Hartwell," she said. "Not because His Grace hired her, but because she saw us." Nathaniel's face turned grey. Adrian looked at the names, at the proof of what Emily had built in 12 days while he had been pretending not to love her. Then he turned to his uncle. "You came to take my house through a clause you never understood," he said. You may leave it before I decide to examine every account you have touched. Nathaniel left before nightfall. Beatrice followed soon after, her reputation damaged by the contract she had exposed and the cruelty she could no longer disguise. But Adrian did not stay to watch them go. He rode through the snow to Briar Glen with the Ashford ring in his pocket and the torn contract in his hand. Emily's aunt's cottage was small, with warm light in one window and smoke rising from the chimney. Emily opened the door herself. She looked tired, pale, and heartbreakingly calm. I thought the agreement was complete, she said. Adrian stepped down from the threshold and knelt in the. Emily's breath caught. I asked you to pretend to be my wife because I was afraid of losing control, he said. But I lost myself the moment I asked you to leave. She looked at the paper in his hand. And the condition? Adrian tore the contract in two. There will be no condition between us again. Only a question. Her eyes filled, but she did not move toward him. Do you want me because Ashford chose me? No, he said. Ashford chose you because you loved it before I had the courage to. I want you because when you entered my house as a lie, you became the only truth in it. He opened his palm. The sapphire ring lay there, dark blue against the snowlight. Come back, not as the woman I hired. Not as the Duchess my uncles will required. Come back only if you can believe that I am asking you as a man who loves you. Emily stared at him for a long moment. Then through tears, she smiled. You were foolish to think I was pretending. Adrian laughed once, broken with relief, and rose as she placed her hand in his. 1 year later, Ashford Manor celebrated Christmas with every window lit. Children from the village ran laughing through the snow. Servants hung garlands in the great hall. Aunt Agatha declared the pudding acceptable, which everyone knew was her highest praise. And Emily, now truly Duchess of Ashford, stood beside Adrian beneath the mistletoe where the false announcement had first stunned the room. Adrian looked at the sapphire ring on her finger. Do you regret those 12 days? Emily leaned closer, her smile warm enough to soften winter itself. Only that you needed 12 days to understand what I knew much sooner. Ashford Manor glowed around them, no longer a house protected by pride but a home saved by love.